Okay,
Okay,
people. So I am joined today by Keith Boynton. Boynton?
Yeah.
Ah, splendid. So Keith has got a new film just about to drop, The Winter House. And yeah, this was great. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Oh, no worries at all. Like, how did all this come about?
Oh gosh, I don't know where to begin the story. I mean, I wrote the script back in 2016. I was in a heavy writing phase. I was trying to just generate as much material as I could. It was inspired by a real house. You know, my family had a lake house growing up. We actually still have it. It's in Connecticut. It's this odd situation where our lake house is 15 minutes from our normal house. And so instead of being vacation, it was like you could literally go there and watch TV. You know, if I wanted to go watch Saturday Night Live with my brother in my teenage years, we'd just go to the lake house. So it was a pretty big part of my growing up, and it's still part of my life. And I guess I became fascinated by, like, what is a sort of summer place like in the winter, right? What's it like in the off season? I think the whole idea of the off season is really fascinating to me. This sort of time and place where you're not supposed to be here. You know, this is a summer place, and here you are in the winter. And it gets very lonely. You know, it's a beautiful place, but it gets really lonely in the off season. And so I think, as independent filmmakers often do, I was sort of looking for things that I had access to, right? Resources I already had. And I thought, well, if I made a movie in the lake house, like it's right there. It's a beautiful place. And so that sort of got me thinking about, well, what kind of thing would happen in that house? What kind of person would go there? What would drive them there, especially in the wintertime? And how would that story unfold? So I wrote the script. I was, very much picturing this particular location, put the script on the shelf for a few years, made another movie, did other stuff. And then I guess the movie that I made before that was called The Scottish Play. And it got a little bit big in a lot of, like, I love that movie. I'm so proud of that movie. That movie came out last year, actually. It's finally available. But it did start to feel like, the cast is kind of big and it's a lot of locations, and like the production's a little bit larger than I could sort of stay in control of. And so I think after that experience, I was really eager to sort of get back to basics. And like, what if it's just two actors in a room? What if it's just me and two actors and we go at it and it's almost like a play? And so the Winter House felt like the perfect antidote, really, to the Scottish Play. The Scottish Play was more ambitious. The Winter House is very stripped down. It's very essentialized, back to basics kind of thing. And so I started reaching out. I reached out to my producers who had made the Scottish Play as well, started reaching out to actors. Became clear very early on that we were not going to shoot in my family's actual lake house for every possible reason. And so then it became this location scouting thing. And, can we find a place that captures some of that feeling? The place that we ended up shooting is completely different. It doesn't look like the house that I pictured at all, but it does capture that feeling of isolation. And, especially in the wintertime, this feeling of like you're on the edge of the world and there's no one else there with you, or maybe there's one other person there with you. And what's that like, So yeah, that's kind of, and then, we were lucky enough to get Lily and Francois to sign on for it. The two of them, Lily Taylor and Francois Arnaud, they kind of signed onto the project on the same day. So we really went from they have the same representation. And so we went from having no cast to basically being ready to go, in an afternoon. It was an amazing feeling. And we got the whole thing done just before the pandemic shut everything down. It was, we shot February of 2020, and literally 3 weeks after we wrapped, everything was closed. So that was
that's crazy.
That was a lucky escape. Yeah. Yeah. And of course we had no idea. We thought, oh great, we wrapped our movie. And then of course, the early days of the pandemic were a great time to be in post-production, because it's just me alone with my laptop, and everybody needed a project. And for me, it was not making my own kombucha or sourdough, but it was making this movie.
But that's a great part. How did you get them on board?
The actors?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's like any relationship. It's finding the right fit. You know what I mean? So it's like everything has to fit. Everything has to come together. The script, the director, the timing, the actor. It's this sort of dance. And I think on a certain level, it's still mysterious to me when it works out, how it works out. There's almost like a kind of destiny to it. And we were not able to stick with our original timetable. We did have to keep pushing production because, you know, you need the right actors in those roles. You know, you need the best possible people. And they have to play off of each other beautifully, and they have to be excited to work together. And the fact that they came on almost as a package, I don't know. Yeah, it did feel sort of providential, but it's a really stressful. You know, we had a great casting director, Pat McCorkle. She did a beautiful job. The gentleman who ended up sort of packaging the film for us, called Barry McPherson. He's the one who represents both Lily and Francois. And so it's you know, it's partly just having the right people in your corner, but it's also it's luck or fate or kismet or whatever it is. And like, you know, God only knows why it happens.
The film is definitely built on performances of characters.
Yeah.
Right. So what did you hold on when they signed on film? How did you prep them to be able to do what they were able to do here?
I mean, to be honest, there wasn't a lot of time between their signing on and actually the start of shooting. I think it was a couple of weeks. So we really we didn't do any rehearsal or anything like that. We had a couple of conversations about the characters. You know, I remember talking to Lily about her, you know, she's got such an incredibly warm presence just naturally as a human being. And that tends to come across in her performances, right? And so I remember talking to her about how it was really important for the character to have a sense of reserve and, you know, a sense of coldness. Like, so that some of her, I don't remember if I put it this way, but I felt like some of her natural warmth would have to be sort of tamped down, at least in certain scenes, right? Because the character is, for one thing, she's going through something incredibly difficult and traumatic. But I think she also is. She's a very reserved and intelligent and calculating sort of person. She doesn't lead with warmth. She doesn't lead with emotion or connection in the way that Lily does. So that was really interesting. And obviously I knew that she was a wonderful actress and I knew she could pull it off, but it was cool to watch her sort of have to play against her instincts in a certain way. And then those moments when the character does warm up, of course, are so much more magical because you've seen the character retreat, you know, you've seen her sort of just want to observe from a distance. And then when she actually is willing to engage with Jesse, with Francois's character, those moments have just absolute magic. I mean, you saw they have this incredible chemistry with each other. But it's nice that he has to work for it. You know, it's nice that it doesn't happen immediately.
Well, it's really, I think that thing. The situation there's on paper, you know, when we've seen these things before, it can seem just a bit preposterous, right? Because like two people meet and then straight away like oh, I'm telling you everything, and you're just like that doesn't happen. What are we doing here? So watching this, you actually like, oh, yeah, this is great because there was that reserve, and even when it felt like they might be opening up, they were still holding some back. So it's just like I like this is happening like it happens in the real world. This isn't just a typical Hollywood, you know, ABC situation.
Yeah, well, and like in the real world, it's of course it's a back and forth, right? It's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So it's not this sort of steady progression of, you know, we start out pretty distant and then we get more and more intimate. It's actually it's up and down the whole way, right? The overall arc might be increasing intimacy, but at the micro level, it's going to start out with reserve and then warm and then cold again, and then warm and then cold again. There's a sort of there's an interesting interplay there, and I like playing with both. You know, like it's fun to surprise yourself and it's fun to surprise the audience. So I like, you know, going for like warmth and empathy at moments when we might expect more conflict. But it's also fun to sort of wedge in that conflict at moments when we think things are going a little too well. You know, it's fun to sort of titrate that, and it's where my background in playwriting, because I've done a lot of playwriting, really comes in handy. You know, so much of playwriting, particularly sort of traditional realistic American playwriting, is about wringing as many variations on a simple situation as you can, right? So you put two people in one room for 2 hours, and how interesting can you make that? How many different versions of their interaction, of their relationship can you have? And I find that really stimulating. I find that much more stimulating than sort of a completely wide open canvas where anything can happen. I like to restrict it. I like to say, all right, it's only going to be a limited number of characters, limited number of locations. Here are the rules of the world, and then what can happen within those rules.
Yeah, no, my favorite film kind of run on that, you know, like Link Blades, before trilogy,
yeah,
you know, like there's different things like this that where it's just two people. Right, navigating a situation together, and that's so compelling. And so, yeah, that was a huge thing in this for me. The strength of the writing. It was super.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. I mean, and I think it gets us to what's elemental about movies, right? I mean, some movies are, of course, much more elaborate, and some of those movies are brilliant. But at the end of the day, the thing that we care about in any movie is human connection, right? That's what we're interested in. That's what we're looking for. So, you know, the story could span the galaxies and it could take place over 1,000 years. We would still be interested in what are those human moments? What are those human relationships? And there's something extra crisp and clear about a story that focuses only on the relationship. There's really nothing else going on in this movie, right? It's winter, it's icy, it's cold. The whole town is kind of dead. And so the only thing happening, I mean, it turns out there are a couple other things going on, but but really, for most of the movie, yeah, there are external forces eventually that impinge on their sort of perverse little idyll. But yeah, for the most part, it's about the connection between these two particular people, and I don't know what could be more essential. What could be more central than that?
Yeah. Now. There was two moments in this film because that's the thing. It felt like this intimate story, right? These interactions and everything like that. But these two moments, for me, felt like it really just opened things up in an incredible way. So there was the poetry, and it's those two versions. Like the first time you through it. And then the second time, slow down the cadence.
Yeah.
And really imbue it with more emotion. And you just boom. You get this whole different kind of expansion of what's going down. And then when they go on the walk and they look at you, and again, it just opens everything up. Like, yeah. Did you write those scenes to do that? Like, did you know they would do that? Like, what was the thinking around that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think what those scenes are both about, you know, both of these characters are people in need of healing. They're very damaged characters in different ways. And so I think to me, those scenes are about that. They're like, what are the things in the world that actually can save you when your own life isn't doing it? And I think like art and poetry are definitely one of those things. And the natural world around you is another thing that, at least for a lot of people, that can be very healing and very saving. And those are also moments that bind the characters together because they both react in a similar way. The poem is Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. It's one of the best poems ever written in the English language. The two characters have a similar, even though one of them is much less educated, much less literary, they have a similar kind of feeling about that poem, a connection to it. And then, they go on this hike and they end up at the top of a ridge and they're looking out over the fields and the wintry valley. And there's something, even though Jesse, the local, kind of hates it, and Eileen, the visitor, kind of loves it, there is something that, I mean, there's a reason he takes her there, right? He takes her to that place. So I think those are, they're moments about connecting to something larger, but they're also about forging that connection with each other. And the poem reading scene in particular was such a lesson in acting, because on the page, I mean, this is literally just the text of a famous poem, and he has to say it twice. So on the page, even though I had an idea in my head of what the scene could mean, obviously I wouldn't have written it otherwise, it could feel a little bit kind of predictable. It could feel a little bit static on the page, just the same language, the same very famous language repeated twice. But Francois brought so much feeling to that moment. He invested in it so deeply that you feel like you're hearing these words for the first time. And it's, you know, it is one of my favorite poems, probably my favorite poem. And I remember we finished shooting that scene, and I told him, I said, look, this is my favorite poem ever, and you really brought it to life in a new way for me. And he just gave me a hug, and it was one of the best moments that we had together on that set. Because I was so grateful that he was able to be so generous with that emotion, and he really did bring that poem to life.
Did he know before this scene?
Yeah, I think so, but I think he deliberately tried not to learn it too much, not to do too much work on it ahead of time, because he wanted to. I think he'd read it. I mean, I think most of us read it at some point at school, but he wanted to come to it as fresh as possible. I mean, he is reading it in the scene, so he doesn't have to have it memorized. So I think he really made the point of sort of discovering the poem or rediscovering the poem himself in front of the camera, which is such an intelligent actor decision to make.
Oh yeah, it really comes across, right? And then the next time it's like, and the love, the dark, and it's so hitches that thing, and it just
and there's something so beautiful too in the way he does it, because he doesn't fall into the trap of acting the poem.
No.
Like, you don't want it to be like, oh, this character suddenly turned into an actor and he's performing this poem beautifully. He's still just reading it, right? So he's not adding a lot of interpretation. Even when he reads it more slowly and with more feeling, it's not like, here's the definitive reading of this poem. It's, here's me, this person in this moment, saying these words out loud. And it's not perfect. It's not totally clean. It's not totally polished. It's still rough, and it's raw, and it's ragged, and he's this character, right? He's someone who maybe doesn't always know how to present himself in language. But the sense of connection is so palpable. And all that she asks him to do is just slow it down. That's all she says. Slow it down. And I think there is probably something in that for everybody. That if any experience has lost its meaning for you, one thing you can always do is slow it down.
Yeah. And I think just having that scene, right, and her going, no, just do this with it, and just like a lot of people look at the poem and they think it's suicide, and so then when he does it down and he's reading it, it's like he's then seeing what she might see in it. So then by then even more.
Yeah. I mean, it is one of those moments of incredible trust between them, right? Because he makes himself so vulnerable in this scene, and she manages to convey to him that he is safe, that he's not going to be humiliated, that she's not going to laugh if he starts to weep, which he does, there's an incredible sense of, I don't know, there's an incredible sense that the two of them are kind of on this tightrope together. She's not forcing him to walk the tightrope alone, but she's on it with him. She's there for him in that moment. And like, the most amazing gift you can give to anyone is deep listening, deep attention. And it's so hard. It's so hard to just be present with another person. But when you can do that, it's magic.
Yeah. For real. Like this isn't you've written and directed a good few films. But how is it to write these kind of moments, right? To be able to nail the emotion kind of conveying in your head.
Yeah, I mean, when it's going well, it's one of the most joyful things you can do. When it's really flowing and you can picture the scene and you have a feeling for the characters And there is this sense that it almost kind of writes itself. I think this screenplay, I think the moment when I wrote it was around the moment when I started to feel really confident as a screenwriter. Like I say, I was writing all the time. I was really, really focused on writing. And it was, I think it was there was a feeling of mastery that I've been writing screenplays since my early 20s. And, I'm not going to say how old I am, but I'm 42, but no, but, it took me at least a decade to have any real feeling for what I was supposed to be doing. And I wrote, God knows how many scripts I wrote that really weren't screenplays in a way. They were sort of attempts at writing screenplays, but I didn't have like an intuitive or a lived-in sense of the shape of a story, of a movie. And in a way, you write movies, right? You don't write screenplays, you write movies. So the movie in your head tells you how to write the screenplay on the page. But it took me at least a decade, probably more, to get to a point where I felt like I actually have the skills to say what I want to say. And I remember this writing process being pretty smooth and pretty easy. I think partly because I knew what the assignment was, just ring the variations on these characters in this place. I did not know where the story was going. I very much discovered the story along the way. But I knew, from the moment that Eileen wakes up and there's a stranger in the house and she comes downstairs and he's in the kitchen and he's making tea. Like, I knew I had a story. I knew that. I think that was the image that was in my head when I started writing. And then, there's 10 pages before that. But at that moment, I knew I had a movie, right? This woman's alone in this house, the dead of winter. She wakes up. There's a stranger downstairs making tea. That's a movie. We're off to the races. And that's all I need.
Yeah. But it's choices that bring you into those moments. And it's what the characters do, which then make it interesting. And you have to observe really what's going on, because that tells you a lot about both of them. At that very moment, that we kind of get more clarity on further in. But it's just that initial interaction, which you don't understand at the time, but it's very, very pivotal in who they are and what they do.
Yeah, and you do get these interesting moments where the characters kind of interpret each other for us, right? Like that first scene between the two of them, is the subject of the last conversation they have in the movie, right? The last conversation they have, they're out on the dock, and Jesse's asking her about like why she made the choices that she made in that first scene between them. And that's really fun for me, because I get to sort of, you get to interrogate your own characters, right? If Jesse has questions about why Eileen behaved that way, well, so does the audience, right? So do I. So it's nice, it's fun for Jesse to be the voice of those of us who have questions about, well, why did you handle it? I'm a stranger in your house. You wake up, you've never seen me before. Why did you approach me this way instead of that way? Why did you come down? Why were you sort of, in a way, kind of open to having this experience? And there isn't just one easy, concrete answer, but the fact that he gets to ask the question is really fun.
Yeah. And that was something that we see throughout the film, right? In different conversations. When there's like talking about death, right? And it's like, I don't want to die, but and sometimes there is that grey area of so many different things. Like, we can act reckless. And to someone else, it's like, you could have death, but it's like, no, I'm really trying to die. But I'm just gonna do this.
Yeah, well, and I think recklessness is really good story material, right? When people make choices that they shouldn't make, that are not rational, that are not smart. Especially when smart people make choices that are not smart, that's very, very rich material for storytelling, right? And I especially love it when the character knows they're making the wrong choice. There's a moment in Four Weddings and a Funeral. I love this moment. It's one of my favorite cinematic moments. Hugh Grant. It's the night of the first wedding. and he's just met Andy McDowell. They're staying at the same B&B. All of his friends are going off to the after party to have a great time, and he has them drop him off at his B&B. Like, he leaves all of his friends to go back to the B&B, and they're like, what are you doing? Why don't you want to come out with us? And he's like, no, it's fine, it's fine. They drop him off on the side of the road by the B&B. All of his friends pull away in the van, and Hugh Grant just goes, odd decision. And I love that. Like, he knows that he's done something that makes no sense. And that, to me, that's so exciting, right? Just the character who's like, oh, why did I do that? That's weird. You know?
Yeah. Because I think that's the thing, right? Because a lot of times, certain situations are played like, oh, it was a happy coincidence. Oh, it was a bit of luck. But in life, right, there's things that you know. This could be dodgy. This could be problematic. This isn't the smartest thing. Oh well, I'm going to do it anyway.
Absolutely.
You know,
well, and sometimes the smartest thing you can do is to do something dumb. You know, if you're really in a rut and you have to shake things up, you might make an irrational choice, and it might not make any sense to anyone else. It might not make any sense to any other version of you, right? But if that's what you feel like you have to do, then there might be a reason.
It's refreshing to actually see these things play out. Because as I said, only time you'll watch something, and it just seems like the sanitized version of reality, and it's so frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, I think this movie sort of walks an interesting line for me, because someone actually made this comment to me when we screened at the Woodstock Film Festival. There was a journalist who came up to me at the end of the screening, or no, he was in the Q&A actually at the end of the screening. And he said, like, this movie keeps flirting with tragedy. It keeps flirting with being the most depressing version of these events. And honestly, like a movie that maybe we've seen before. And then it keeps sort of veering away from that version of the film. And I thought that was really insightful. That sort of illuminated the movie for me, actually. I think when I was writing it, I was very aware that the story could go to the darkest possible places, and I didn't want to, right? So I was sort of like walking this line of, you want it to feel authentic, you want the characters to be real, you want the possibility of tragedy to be there. But I also wanted it to be a movie that had optimism, and that had a heart, and that had redemption. And of course, those are things that exist in the real world too. It's not like the most depressing art is actually the most realistic, but oftentimes we think that way. Oftentimes we think the way to make a story realistic is to make it really dark and sad.
Yes.
And I'm much more interested in, I guess, in a way, like real realism is a balance between both, right? The good and the bad, the light and the dark. Of course, there's place in the world for movies that are fairly brutal and unrelenting, but it's not the kind of movie that I want to make. I'm much more interested in redemption, in hope, and people being good to each other. Maybe even being better than other people have a right to expect. I think that's really rich story material too. And I don't think maximum conflict is always the best route to a good story.
No. And I think when we think about situations that we find ourselves in, there's times you feel sad, right? You feel down.
Yeah.
But it's not want to stay in that state.
No.
Right? But it could just be that there's just not anything happening to kind of help rise up. But so as that door starts to open, you could go through it.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's the thing. Right? You can be sad, you can be depressed, but that isn't the default state.
Right.
Yeah,
I think that's really, I think that's really insightful with regard to these characters in particular, that these are two people who are sad, who don't want to be sad. They're people in a really dark place who don't want to be in that dark place. And that's what they're able to find in each other, is like the tools to get out, right, of that depression or whatever it is. But you have to want it. And yeah, I mean, I think this is maybe taking the conversation to a very dark place, but the people who are most lost are the people who don't actually want to get better. And that can happen too. There are people who, at least in a given moment, they don't want to get better, they don't want to be happy. And hopefully those moments pass for most of us, but that's when you really start to worry about someone if they don't want it to be better.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's so complex, right? Because I think there's not wanting to be sad and happy to take exit into happiness as soon as it arrives. Then I think there's wanting to get out of it, but not being able to navigate the maze. So you need a guide. You need someone to come and help you out. And then it's just like, nah, I'm gonna stay here.
Yeah,
I'll stay here. But sometimes it's not even you want to stay there forever. It's just like I'm not ready for the light right now.
Sure. Yeah, and obviously that's valid too, right? It's we are allowed to have moments when we don't even feel like trying. That's part of the human experience, but you hope that those moments don't last too long. And oftentimes you do, at the end of the day, you can't really save another person, but you can be that vital catalyst that they need, right? You can be the momentary consolation or the hand up or the encouraging smile. You can be something that encourages them to save themselves or see that they can save themselves. Yeah, I think that's kind of what the movie's about. I think it's what the movie's about. It's two people who almost sort of accidentally kind of save each other.
Yeah. They're lighthouse. You know what I mean? And I think that's what you need sometimes, right? It can be dark, it can be murky, and then you see that glimmer, right?
Yeah.
And it's that you can see it and you can lose it, but when someone isn't offended by your sadness, right? And because we can try and push away, just go away. But when someone's just like, nope, I'm gonna be here. I'm your light, guiding you in.
Yeah,
that's the thing that you need, and that they work for each other. And
well, and I love that lighthouse analogy in part because a lighthouse is something far away, right? You can't actually get up to it and embrace it, right? It's not going to pull you out of the shipwreck yourself, right? But it is a beacon. It does guide you. It does, and at the end of this movie, these characters I hope it's not a spoiler, but at the end of the movie, they're not in the same physical place, right? But they do still have a connection to each other. And I mean, to some degree, even the people you're closest to, they are still a distant lighthouse, right? You can't actually share someone else's thoughts or feelings. You can empathize, but like we are on some level, everyone is alone, and on another level, we're all deeply connected. And but both of those things, once again, it's the tension between opposites. Both of those things are just very, very true.
Yeah. With ending, did that change in any way? Like where having the character get to a certain place in their story, but not have it feel right.
Yeah.
Right, but still satisfactory. Still when the viewers be like, I like that. That makes sense. I feel they're at that point where they would do that thing. Like, how did that come to you?
I mean, I think I knew that it should be a bittersweet ending. I didn't want all bitter. I didn't want all sweet. My own default, especially as a writer, I don't know about as a human being, but my own default is for things to be pretty sweet. And The Scottish Play is a very sweet movie. The one I made before, which is sort of a Shakespearean theme, that's a very warm-hearted movie, and this one's a little bit more complicated. I knew that it shouldn't feel like an easy, picture-perfect Hollywood ending. I also knew that I don't actually have it in me to torture a character to death. You know what I mean? There are limits to what I can bring myself to do, even to a fictional person, especially to a fictional person. I think the broad strokes of the ending were pretty easy to come to. They sort of grew out of the logic of the rest of the story, and getting through getting that kind of synthesis of hope and difficulty. It was one of the few line changes we made. was near the very end, and it was Lily's idea. The line in the script, I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but when she comes down and she reads this note, the line in the script was, God damn it, Jesse, it was just a stupid book, which people who've seen the movie will understand what this means. I'm not going to explain it. But the line was, God damn it, Jesse, it was just a stupid book. And Lily didn't feel like that was the right tone. And so we changed it to, couldn't you have just waited a day? Is the line that ended up in the movie. Which is, I don't know if that's the same sentiment or a different sentiment. I'm not sure. I don't even know if it's better or worse, to be honest, but it's like, it was really important to her to, I think, to have the character be acknowledging her own grief, I guess, that, you know, to have it not be too easy for her. Yeah. And, you know, of course, whatever redemptive outcome there is can only have meaning in the context of real loss and hurt and tragedy. So hopefully we achieve the right balance of those things.
Yeah, no, you really did. That was great. Like understanding that what has to happen, right? If you're ever going to find peace and salvation, that has to happen. But it's like, I mean, just 24 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, just that little bit. Like I'm content with this,
right?
But just 24 hours.
Yeah, there is something very human about that. It's the bargaining impulse, right? It's like, oh, but just, yeah. I mean, you always want more time. You're always going to want more time, and I guess that's better than the alternative. It's better than not wanting more.
Yeah. Oh, very true. like because you worked as an editor as well. Like how much of that lays into how you create?
It's interesting. I mean, I guess I should say I don't think of myself as an editor. I mean, I do edit my own films. I've been editing my own films a long time. I never edit anyone else's films, so I don't think of myself as an editor so much as you know, just a director who gets his hands dirty at the end of the process. It's really, I think it's vital for a director to think about editing, to be able to think like an editor. I don't think directors have to be editors, but I think directors have to be very, very aware of what it is to be in the editing room, dealing with that footage and really trying to build the movie out of it. The mistake it's easy to make is, well, there are lots of mistakes. There are 1,000 pitfalls that come from shooting the movie in general. Here's some general coverage. Here's some shots in general, right? And I guess if you get enough shots, maybe that can work, but you save so much time and energy and aggravation by, it's not that you edit it in advance in your head. I don't do like a detailed storyboard. I'm not Alfred Hitchcock, but you save so much time on set and so much frustration on set by having a feeling for what moments you need and how they're gonna cut together. So I don't need to know where the cuts are. In general, I don't need to know where the cuts are. But I do need to know that we got this moment of their eyes meeting across the room. I need to know that we got his close-up, that we got her close-up. I need to know, you know, if a character's looking out a window, I need to know that we've got the shot out the window, if that's part of the scene. And if it's not part of the scene, I need to know that also, right? It's like maybe the character's looking out the window, but what's important isn't what's out the window. What's important is what's behind him, right? So I need to know that too. I think you can get yourself in a lot of trouble if you're not shooting for the editing room. But you should always be shooting for the editing room. You should always have in your mind, you know, this footage doesn't stand on its own. This footage lives or dies when I start to splice it together.
I think you know, and I think that's in so many other things, right? When you're writing stuff, just like I know, just in the day job, you know, writing, it's thinking, what's the objective? who's the audience? Like, what do I want to achieve by this? Right, so you always have to be intent of something to really maximize that end product.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it's an incredible time saver. And yeah, if you see people in the world who do seem just incredibly productive or incredibly efficient, it's likely because of that, because they're thinking about the goal all the time. And it's a lot of it's about what you don't do, right? What you not spend time on. You know, if you're absolutely certain that you know what your mission is, then there's a lot of stuff you don't have to do. Whereas if you have just a general sense of what kind of thing you're trying to achieve, yeah, you're going to end up wasting a lot of time and effort doing things that maybe you didn't need to do, or things that you could have done maybe in just a simpler and more straightforward way. You know, one of the things I love about filmmaking is that it's all compromise. I mean, I'm in pre-production on a movie right now, and like every conversation is about, well, if we don't have this, it's going to have to be this. We could have this, but then we have to give up this. That's great. You know, it's possible to have resources that are too limited and really be constrained by it, you know, in an unfortunate way. But in general, you want constraints, right? You want to be pushing up against reality. You want to be forced to make those choices. Like my nightmare is, you know, this is a 3-page dialogue scene in the kitchen and we have all week to shoot it.
Yeah.
That's my nightmare, because I don't know what to do with that time. I want to shoot that scene in 6 hours and then I want to move on and shoot something else. And if you tell me I have to shoot it all week, I would go crazy. I would do too many takes. I would do too much coverage. I would lose my mind. The actors would hate me. That's my absolute worst. I would much rather have, you know, 2 hours to get the scene when it should be 6 than have outrageous amounts of time. Although, you know, both are painful in different ways.
Well, I always an interesting thing, right? But how many times have we seen a great indie director, right? Suddenly given the keys to a studio, right? It's in his first YouTube product. Oh, this is awesome. There's more money, more time. They're obviously gonna kill it. And it's just like, ooh, what happened? It was so saggy, just uncoordinated. And I think that's that thing, right? It's not having those restraints.
Yeah.
Not having to go, if this can't do. It's just like, we can do it.
Right.
I got triple the time to do this shot. And then you're just like, should I add more to it? You do a cut, and it's like, that's great, but I've got all this time. Should we do it again? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Now we're in Nightmare Land. I remember there was some story about making Lord of the Rings. I wish I could remember all the details of this, but apparently at one point, Andy Serkis was off with a second unit as the second unit director, and he was filming a big battle scene with no idea where it would go in the movie, or even which movie. He was just out there. Maybe it was The Hobbit, maybe it was Lord of the Rings. Anyway, to me, and like all respect to those filmmakers, Andy Serkis is a genius. To me, that's just a sign that something has gone horribly, hideously wrong. Like, you're out there getting footage of like orcs bashing together. You don't even know what sequence it's in. Like, just take a break at that point. Just do something else. Shoot a music video, you know? No, it's really, yeah. And I think the filmmakers who do make the successful transition to big budget, it's because they don't think of it differently. You know, Christopher Nolan has talked about this. You know, he's made brilliant low budget movies, brilliant big budget movies. But he's talked about it. He doesn't approach it differently. It's not a different process, right? He's always behind the camera. He doesn't have a second unit director, which is very unusual. He's always the person approving every image because it's all going to be in the movie, right? And so, you know, maybe the shot is just of someone's watch, but you can't farm that off to someone else because you're the director. You have to be there. You have to get the shot. You have to make sure the watch looks the way you want it to look. And I think that's the, and of course, if you have $100 million and you're spending it correctly, you do run into limitations, right?
Yeah.
Like if that's your budget, then the film better be that ambitious. It better be that big in scale, which means you are going to run out of money for something. At some point, you're going to be like, oh, wouldn't it be great to do this? We can't. We don't have the money. We don't have the time. It's too, we got to spend that money on something else, right? So in theory, like it's not really that a budget can be too big. It can just be too big for what you're doing.
Yes. And I think the big thing is, because it's like you'd actually don't have to use all that money. Right? You don't have to use it. And I remember I was creating this image bank, and so there's a load of people like coming to me, oh, we'll do this, we'll do that. And you just look at the deals, and it's just like, I mean, no, that doesn't really make sense. Right? I don't want to go that route. And even though I had the budget, right? But it's just like, no, that's gonna. I think that will fuck up the end goal, right? That's the objective. I think it's looking at things, even though you've got a budget, it's still having the mindset of not having a budget, right? So you weigh things up for the worth, not for the cost. And be like, what is this actually bringing to this? Rather than oh, I can afford it. Let's just do it.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things that makes it, and I'm certainly not claiming to be totally consistent about this myself. Like, anyone can lose the plot, anyone can lose track of what really matters. But one of the things that makes real visionaries in the world, real leaders, is exactly what you said, right? Being focused on the outcome, being focused on the goal. And when you are in that mentality, there's a kind of beautiful ruthlessness to it, right? You are a knife cutting through all the layers of what's in your way. When you lose track of the goal, then you're a cudgel, you're a blunt instrument, and all you can do is just keep beating away at what might be the wrong wall, right? You're lost at that point. And yeah, again, I'm not saying that I'm above this. Anyone can get lost, but it's worth reminding yourself, and it's never too late to ask yourself that question. Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing it for the right reason? And can I turn the ship around if not?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, when you think about what you've created with this film kind of speaks into the whole AI conversation.
Oh, interesting.
Because everyone's like, oh, AI will be taking away all the writing jobs, right? AI can write songs now. AI can do this. I don't think it can do this, though. I don't think it can write the Winter House. Because I think it's the human element, right? It's being out in that center. Now, I think AI can write a generic franchise sequel. Right? Those films that are clearly made so you can hold on to that license for a few more years. Right? You trash that thing out. You look at it and it's like, I mean, there's explosions, there's but there's not really soul. But any of those films with that heart, just like I mean, like latest trilogy, like Up was the first Pixar film where I oh my god, I got this.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I wasn't quite in what everyone else was. It was incredible. Incredible, amazing. I saw Up and I was just like, yo, I love it. Soul from 2020. That was incredible. That film. I don't think AI can do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess I'm hesitant to say one way or the other, because obviously these technologies, they're improving, right? They're improving every day.
Well, yes, I think
they're going to get better and better.
It can't do that.
Yeah, maybe not yet. Maybe someday it can. But I guess I would want to ask the question, and related to what we were talking about earlier, about sort of the purpose of what you're doing. Do we want AI to write screenplays? Like, clearly AI can write a screenplay now, right? Is it better or worse than what a human being can do? Pretty subjective. But do we want AI to be like writing a screenplay? It doesn't have to take an enormous amount of time. It's not that many words. It's 20,000 words or so. They're relatively short. It can take years. It could take weeks. It depends. But right, in some ways, writing a screenplay is the easy part. Like filmmaking is big and expensive, and it involves a big team. Anyone can sit down and write a script, right? Scripts are cheap and they're disposable, and most of them are bad, so that makes them even more disposable. So, like, you could program ChatGPT to write you 1,000 screenplays in what, I don't know, a minute, right? Maybe less. But what it's not going to do for you is tell you which ones are good or which ones are better than which other ones, which ones are worth your time. I think AI is an amazing tool. I think something like writing a screenplay is going to be one of the least useful applications of it. I think AI is going to be revolutionary in medicine. It's going to be revolutionary. I mean, maybe every field there is, right? Like, it's got basically infinite potential. But what could be more human than sitting down and going, I don't know, what do I want to happen in this story? What makes a good story? Let's try this, right? I mean, it just seems like a quintessentially human activity. If there's anything we want human beings doing, I would imagine it's expressing themselves. Because at the end of the day, that's what we care about, is human beings expressing themselves. That's what, like, it's related to the reason why we want to know these days. We want to know what our favorite creator had for breakfast, right? Or we want to know, like, whether he's visiting a new city or whether he's made a new friend. So much of this social media stuff is access to the ordinary lives of extraordinary people, right? Why do we care what Tom Hanks had for breakfast? Because we care about the human being. We don't only care about his work. His work is beautiful, right? It's amazing. But we don't just care about what he does in the movies. We care about him. We connect to him as a human being. That's very natural. That's very normal. If an AI wrote a screenplay, you might enjoy the movie, but you couldn't shake the hand of the AI. You couldn't congratulate the AI. You couldn't form an actual human bond with that thing, right? So you want to be able to shake the screenwriter's hand. You want to be able to meet him for coffee. You want to be able to tell him what you didn't like in the movie. I don't know. To me, all of that stuff is just as important as what's actually on the screen.
Oh, for sure. Right. And that's why when people try and say cinema is dead, I think it's right. Because going to the cinema is a human component to it, right? It's about being that screen and then other people laughing at things that you find funny. Right? Right. Oh, shit. Oh, you like that too? Oh, awesome. Yeah. Right? And then you're screaming, that's incredible. Something like, yeah, right. You like the bit with that? That was amazing. And then you have that dialogue.
Yeah.
You don't get that watching something on your own on Netflix or Prime or Apple or wherever. It's convenient. So I'm just like having those options is great. Because you're feeling ill and you're like, I can't get out of the house to the cinema, but I really want to watch this film. It's great to have that option. But going to the cinema, sharing in that kind of symbiotic experience, I don't think you're gonna not want that.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I hope that one of the things the last 2 years have taught us is how much we care about going to the movies and seeing them in person, right? Last year, it was Top Gun. Everyone came out and saw Top Gun. A great time at the movies, a great big screen experience, right? This year, it was Oppenheimer, it was Barbie, it was the new Mission Impossible. These were movies that people wanted to see in the theaters. And I hope that as a culture, we absorb the lesson that it's great to be able to watch stuff at home. That's lovely. What an amazing convenience. What an amazing privilege. But if we ever lose this movie theater experience, we've really lost something valuable.
Yeah. I think a problem with the whole situation, and you don't seem to always get it being addressed, it's the cost of it all. Right? Just remember back in the day, right? The cinema was the cheap day. Right? It was a cheap thing to do when you didn't have a lot of money. Like to hang out with your friends. Let's go to the cinema. It's no longer that option.
Yeah.
Right? It's gonna cost you like £30 for the two cinema tickets. Then you've got you know, if you really want a concession, and it's just like never buy concessions.
Yeah. But I want it. I want the popcorn.
It's buying those concessions. It's getting your transport there. It's food afterwards. You're dropping maybe like a minimum of 100.
Yeah, easily. Yeah.
And
I don't know what you do about that, because of course it's expensive to operate these places too. You know, obviously they're big spaces. There's the rent on the space. There's the personnel. You want a good projector. I mean, I don't claim to deeply understand the economics of the movie theater business, but you're absolutely right. It's not as accessible as maybe it should be. Yeah, and I don't know what the answer is. I mean, maybe the answer is just that we all go less, but we still go. And maybe that's the best we can hope for, both because we have more convenient options and because it's not cheap. Maybe we just have to be more selective. And I don't know. It does seem like a shame. It seems like there should be a world where, yeah, you can just go to a movie on a whim and not think too much about it.
Well, I if they drop the price, more people buy concessions. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That big thing. And it doesn't have to lower the price so it's crazy. But make it cheaper. More people will go.
Yeah, I think my understanding is the movie theaters make most of their money on the concessions.
Oh yeah, no, real.
So but yeah, no, I mean, you may be right. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how it's economically feasible. In some ways, movie theaters do seem antiquated, but I hope they stick around. I love them so much. And you're absolutely right. There's a kind of connection there that you can't have anywhere else.
Yeah. Like what? With the kind of things, right? What is the stuff that you enjoy consuming?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think I have a pretty broad taste. I guess if I'm being honest, I used to watch more indie films and foreign films, and yeah, these days I see a lot of blockbusters. Yeah, I mean, I guess I like I'm not lowbrow and I'm not highbrow. I'm middlebrow. You know what I mean? So I like an indie movie that has a Hollywood feel for story, right? Or a Hollywood movie that has kind of an indie film feel for character and theme. You know, the movies that could be light and disposable, but actually have guts and heart, which you can do on a $100 million, $200 million budget. It's not impossible. Those movies exist. Or the movies that are made on a relative shoestring, but that still have some cinematic scope and ambition, right? So I'm not super interested in the most generic version of the blockbuster where it's just explosions, but I'm also not super interested in the most generic indie where it's just people screaming at each other in a kitchen. I feel like we gotta have something in between where, like, if it is gonna be an argument in a kitchen, well, someone said, you know, shoot a love scene like it's a war scene and shoot a war scene like it's a love scene. I can't remember who said this. But I think there's something to that, right? If your story is very small and intimate, try to make it as epic as possible. And if your story happens to be an epic, try to make it as intimate as possible. I think ultimately you want that push and pull between, you know, I think about a movie like, I mean, this is a cliche to admire, but Lawrence of Arabia, one of the greatest movies ever made. And it couldn't be more epic and it couldn't be more intimate. It's about one man, one very peculiar man. It's about his personality. And it's, you know, it's not a movie that's afraid of small moments.
Yeah, no, very true. Very true, man. And you're working on a new project at the moment.
Yeah, I'm actually making my first horror film. I'm in Maryland right now. We're in pre-production. We start shooting in 3 weeks from today. And hey man, how's it going? I'm pretty excited about it. It's a slasher film. It's called The Haunted Forest. And it's going to be a low budget, even lower than the last two. It's going to be a small crew. We're going to be out in the forest at night, all night, and it's going to be a little bit miserable, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun too.
So what inspired you that horror genre?
The location. So it's this haunted forest is a real place. It's called Markov's Haunted Forest, and it's one of the most famous haunts in the country. It's sort of like a haunted house, but in the woods. Incredibly elaborate, incredibly beautiful. It's my cousins who run this thing, and so I just wanted to do something. I wanted to sort of pay tribute to this place. It's gorgeous. They've put their hearts and souls into the place, and yeah, I wanted to showcase it.
Okay. Here's the thing, actually, right? You're shooting in this forest. So now, at the end of the day, you're looking at your PA. And then it's a, wait, what the fuck is that? What do you do, man? You've got more things to shoot, but you've just seen the sign on the fucking screen. You've gone back into that forest.
Oh man, yeah. Well, I hope we don't run into any real ghosts or zombies or ghouls, but you never know. They're out there. Good to see you, man. Yes, yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there. That's my cousin Sotir. He works at the Haunted Forest. I'm going to go check it out this evening. It's actually perfect timing that he walked through. I mean, that was like we planned it. Cross promotion.
Well, hey, I had a long time, and so I don't want you not to miss the forest and all of that. So I will let you go. But when you've done this horror film, please come by and have a conversation.
I would love that. Yeah, this has been really fun, Kevin. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for inviting me on, and yeah, I hope we can talk again soon.
Awesome. And let people know where they can follow you and monitor all the great things you're doing.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'm on Facebook. I have an author page on Facebook, which is called Keith Boynton, Writer and Filmmaker. I'm also on Instagram. That's mostly just my personal Instagram, but it's just Keith Boynton. And those are the best places to follow me. I try to keep those, especially the Facebook, keep it updated pretty regularly.
Outstanding. For people, Winter House is Keith's new joint. Just when you look at the cast is incredible, right? But the story as well is amazing. The directing, the cinematography. Hey, all the pieces of this pie are incredible. Go check it out. Follow Keith. Make your life a little bit brighter.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Really appreciate it.
All right. You have a great day.
You too. Take good care.
All right. Peace.
Bye.